Georgia, 1932, Troup County. The South was still a wound then, one covered by hymns on Sunday and reopened by hatred come nightfall. In the summer of 1932, in the rolling farmland of Georgia, a man named Samuel Greene lived with his wife and two young sons on a patch of red earth he'd inherited from his father. To most, Samuel was just another black farmer, quiet, hard-working, unthreatening. But to the men who ruled Troup County from behind white robes, he was something far more. Dangerous, a man who read the Bible out loud every night, with his door open and his children listening. The Klan had been losing control. Cotton prices were falling, tempers rising, and the men who once ruled through fear were now ruled by their own. Whispers started after Samuel refused to leave his land when a local white store owner tried to claim it over a false debt. "That Negro's forgotten his place," they said. "He talks too much about God and not enough about gratitude." It was all the reason they needed. And so one night, when the air was thick with heat and the moon hung low like an omen, they came, torches in hand, hoods pulled tight, ready to teach another lesson. But what happened that night would echo through the county for decades, because when the Klan came for Samuel Greene, they didn't find a man ready to beg or fight back with bullets. They found a man standing barefoot in his yard, holding nothing but a Bible. And before the night was over, those men would learn that faith, when wielded by the unbroken, can be more terrifying than any weapon. Samuel Greene was not born fearless. He was made that way by the world. His father had been born a slave, freed only by paper but never by peace. As a boy, Samuel learned early that a black man in Georgia had to keep his eyes low and his voice soft if he wanted to live long enough to see his children grow. But Samuel was different. He worked his land with quiet pride, never stealing, never begging, and never lying down for another man's comfort. His wife Clara used to tell him, "Samuel, your mouth's going to get us killed one day." And he'd smile, gentle but steady, replying, "If the truth kills us, Clara, then we were already dead." By 1932, the Great Depression had turned the South meaner. White men who had once mocked black labor now resented it. The Klan meetings grew louder, more frequent, fueled by the poison of poverty and pride. When a white storekeeper named Harlan Tate accused Samuel of owing him money for supplies he'd already paid for, Samuel refused to bow. "You'll get no more than you're owed," he said in front of half the town. Those words traveled fast, too fast. By sundown, the whispers had turned to warnings. "They gon' come for you tonight." Clara begged him to take the children and hide in the woods, but Samuel only shook his head. "If I run now," he said, "my sons will spend their whole lives running." That evening, the sun sank behind the pines, and the air turned still. Samuel washed his hands, changed into a clean shirt, and sat on the porch with his Bible in his lap. His boys, David and Henry, peeked out the window as he read aloud from Psalms. "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear?" The sound of his voice was calm, almost soothing, even as Clara paced behind him, wringing her hands. "You can't pray away evil, Samuel," she whispered. "No," he said, closing the book and looking out into the darkness, "but you can make it hear you." The night grew heavy with silence, the kind that announces trouble. Then came the sound that turned blood cold in every black home across the South, the low growl of engines and the rhythmic crunch of tires on gravel. Clara froze. The boys pressed their faces to the glass. Down the road, a line of flickering torches appeared, moving like a slow, burning snake through the trees. Samuel stood, his Bible still in hand. "Stay inside," he told his wife softly. "Lock the door and don't open it, no matter what you hear." She wanted to scream, to grab him, to make him hide. But when she looked at him, calm, tall, the firelight already painting gold on his dark skin, she knew she couldn't move him. Samuel Greene wasn't waiting for a miracle. He was the miracle. And that night he intended to prove it. The line of torches grew closer, the flames bobbing between the pine trees like spirits crawling toward judgment. The clan moved in a slow, deliberate rhythm, the kind of cruelty that takes its time. The air was thick with gasoline, sweat, and something colder. Certainty. They had done this before. They expected screams, begging, surrender. What they didn't expect was silence. When they reached the Greene property, the men stopped at the fence, their faces hidden behind white hoods that glowed faintly in the firelight. One of them, tall, broad, with a voice like gravel, stepped forward and called out, "Samuel Greene!" His tone wasn't angry. It was mocking, casual, as if he were calling for a stray dog. "You've been talking too big for a man who owes money. Time to pay what's due." Samuel stood on his porch, barefoot, still holding his Bible. The firelight from the torches painted his face in red and gold, his eyes steady and unblinking. "I owe no man," he said, his voice calm but carrying through the night. "And you got no debt to collect here, 'cept from your own souls." The men muttered among themselves, thrown off by his composure. The tall one, Harlan Tate, the storekeeper, spat on the ground. "Don't you preach at me, boy," he hissed. "I done heard enough of your holy talk." Samuel opened his Bible, flipping a page with deliberate care. "Then close your ears," he said, "but the Lord hears all." A ripple of unease moved through the group. The torches crackled, the horses snorted and shifted. One man in the back whispered, "He ain't scared." Tate turned on him. "Then we'll teach him how to be." He stepped forward, pointing his torch toward the porch. "Last chance, Greene. Kneel down, say you're sorry, and maybe we let you live." Samuel looked down at the torchlight licking the edge of the steps, then back up at Tate. "I kneel for God, not men." The silence that followed felt like the world had stopped breathing. Even the night insects were still. Then Tate snarled and hurled his torch at the porch. It landed near Samuel's feet, sparks leaping onto the wood. Clara gasped from inside, the boys clutching her dress. Samuel didn't move. He simply looked down, then back at the men, and raised his Bible high. His voice came out like thunder, strong and steady. "No weapon formed against me shall prosper." The words hit the men like a strike of lightning. Some stepped back instinctively, others raised their guns. But as the flames licked the porch, the wind shifted, hard and sudden, blowing the fire back toward them. The torches flared in the gust, spilling sparks across their robes. One man cursed, batting at the flame crawling up his sleeve. Another stumbled, dropping his torch into the dry grass. In seconds, the air filled with chaos, shouts, smoke, confusion. Samuel didn't move from his porch. He just kept reading, his voice ringing through the fire. "The Lord is my strength and my shield. My heart trusted in him, and I am helped." The men scrambled, their control unraveling. In the same fire they'd brought, and for the first time that night, it was they who looked afraid. The wind roared like something alive, sweeping across the field and twisting the flames toward the men who had lit them. Torches fell to the dirt, sparks jumping like angry bees. Horses reared, eyes wide with panic, their nostrils flaring as smoke rolled into their faces. The men shouted over each other, stumbling backward, their white robes turning orange in the firelight. Harlan Tate cursed and tried to steady his rifle, but the heat was fierce, and his men were scattering. "Fall back!" someone shouted, though no one seemed to hear. The air filled with the crackle of burning grass and the high, ragged screams of fear, the sound of hate meeting something it couldn't understand. On the porch, Samuel Greene didn't move an inch. The pages of his Bible fluttered in the wind like wings. Clara watched from behind the door, her hand over her mouth, her children clinging to her skirt. The glow from the flames lit Samuel like a figure from a sermon, barefoot, unshaken, eyes steady on the chaos below. He didn't look like a man about to die. He looked like a man who had already conquered death. As the fire spread around the clansmen, he spoke again, louder, his voice cutting through the roar. "For the wicked are like the troubled sea when it cannot rest, whose waters cast up mire and dirt. There is no peace, saith my God, to the wicked." The words struck the night like thunder. A gust of wind ripped across the yard, bending the flames so violently that they seemed to chase the men themselves. One torch rolled toward a kerosene can they had dropped, and the explosion that followed was deafening. A fireball shot upward, lighting the pines for half a mile. The men screamed and broke rank completely, running for their trucks, their robes flapping like broken wings. Horses bolted into the woods. In minutes, the once powerful clan raid had become a frantic retreat, their torches abandoned, their leader shouting in vain. When the last engine roared away into the dark, the only sound left was the crackle of fire and Samuel's voice, softer now, steady and low. "The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want." He closed the Bible and looked up at the sky, smoke curling past the stars. Behind him, the porch smoldered, the boards blackened but intact. He turned toward the door, opened it, and met Clara's trembling eyes. "They gone," he said quietly. She pressed her hand to his chest, feeling his heart still pounding like a drum. "Samuel," she whispered, "you didn't fight them." He shook his head. "Didn't need to," he said, holding up the Bible. "They fought themselves." That night, after dousing what fire remained, Samuel sat again on that porch, Bible in hand, watching the ashes cool. The road was empty now, but he knew the story wouldn't stay that way. The neighbors had heard. The county would whisper. Some would call it luck, others would call it madness. But those who understood faith, they'd call it what it was, a miracle made of courage and conviction, carved into the heart of Georgia's red dirt forever. When dawn broke, the sky over Troup County glowed soft and pink, as if the earth itself was too tired from the night before to hold more darkness. The smell of burned grass still hung in the air, and the ashes along the fence line shimmered faintly in the early light. Samuel sat on his porch again, the same Bible open on his lap, a bucket of water beside him. His hands were blackened with soot, his face streaked with sweat and smoke, but his eyes were calm. Clara stepped out slowly, her voice still shaky from the hours spent awake. "They'll be back," she whispered. Samuel didn't look up. "Then they'll find the same thing they did last night," he said softly. "A man who kneels for God alone." Down the road, neighbors began to appear one by one, drawn by curiosity and disbelief. Some came in silence, hats in hand, their faces pale from what they'd heard. Others came whispering, glancing over their shoulders, as if the very mention of the clan could summon them again. They found Samuel's house still standing, blackened around the porch but whole. The yard was littered with charred wood, melted torches, and a single hood tangled in the weeds, a ghost unmasked by its own fire. Old Miss Ada Williams, who had lived on the next farm for 50 years, shook her head as she picked it up with trembling fingers. "You shamed the devil, Samuel Greene," she said, half in awe, half in fear. "Ain't never seen fire turn on the ones who set it." By mid-morning, word had traveled across the county. At the general store, men whispered that the Negro preacher-farmer had cursed the clan. Some claimed the wind had shifted unnatural, others that Samuel had spoken in tongues that sent the fire back. But among his own people, the story grew into something greater, a legend. Mothers told their children, "Faith'll fight for you when you can't." Men who'd once looked down when white men passed now raised their eyes. The tale of Samuel Greene spread through every church and field in Troup County like wind through the corn. That Sunday, the small clapboard church at the crossroads was so full that people stood outside, fanning themselves under the hot Georgia sun just to hear him preach. Samuel stepped up to the pulpit, his Bible worn, the edges still scorched. He didn't speak of miracles or revenge. He only said, "You can't burn truth and you can't drown light. What they meant for fear, God turned to fire for us." The congregation erupted, shouting and crying, the walls trembling with amens. That morning they didn't just hear a sermon, they witnessed the birth of courage, lit by a man who'd faced hell with a Bible and come out shining. By the week's end, the story of Samuel Greene had outgrown the town. It rolled through the farms, across church pulpits, and into the kitchens of families who had long stopped believing that justice could happen in their lifetime. The story changed as it traveled. Some said angels had appeared behind him when he raised the Bible, others that the fire had split the sky like judgment itself. But no matter how it was told, one truth remained. A black man in Georgia had faced the Klan without a weapon, and won. It was the kind of story the South tried to bury, but roots that deep couldn't be hidden. In LaGrange, the sheriff called Samuel in for questioning. Not arrest, questioning. The white men in town needed to hear it for themselves, to make sense of something that defied everything they understood. Samuel went clean and calm, carrying the same Bible under his arm. The sheriff, a red-faced man with too much authority and too little conscience, sat behind his desk, chewing tobacco. "Now, Greene," he said slowly, "you expect me to believe you didn't shoot at those men?" Samuel met his gaze without flinching. "Didn't fire a shot." The sheriff leaned back, "And yet they ran like the devil himself was on their heels." Samuel smiled faintly. "Maybe he was." The room fell quiet. The sheriff spat into a tin cup, uneasy. "You keep your head down, hear? Folks don't like when a man looks too proud after a miracle." When Samuel stepped back outside, sunlight poured across the courthouse steps. A group of black workers from the nearby mill stood waiting, hats in hand. They didn't speak, but the way they looked at him said everything. They'd heard. They'd seen in him what they'd been told all their lives didn't exist, power that couldn't be whipped, burned, or broken. That evening, when he returned home, Clara met him at the door, tears already falling. "They could have killed you," she whispered. Samuel wrapped his arms around her and said, "Maybe, but then they'd have to face the truth in my place. And I don't think they're ready for that." That night, as the crickets sang outside and the air cooled, Samuel sat on his porch again, Bible open, candle flickering beside him. His boys sat cross-legged at his feet, listening. "Why didn't they hurt us, Papa?" young Henry asked. Samuel looked out into the dark fields, where the smoke from the burned grass still lingered faintly. "Because, son," he said quietly, "some men see fire and think it's power, but real power's the kind that don't burn, it shines." The boys nodded, not fully understanding, but feeling the weight of his words settle deep. And though the road in front of their home still bore the black scars of that night, Samuel knew that something had changed forever. The fire had burned more than wood. It had burned away fear. The weeks that followed felt unreal. Samuel couldn't step into town without people staring, some with awe, others with resentment. The white men in the feed store stopped talking when he entered. Their eyes followed him like he was some strange force they couldn't name. A few spat in the dirt as he passed, others crossed the street, but none dared touch him. The same men who once barked orders at him now muttered under their breath and moved aside. The Klan had gone quiet, too quiet. No one wore their robes in public, and the burned patch of land down the road stood like a warning that hate could be consumed by its own fire. Still, Samuel knew silence wasn't peace. It was planning. One evening, a letter appeared nailed to his gate, scrawled in rough handwriting, "You got lucky once. God won't save you twice." Clara's hands shook as she read it. "Samuel, we have to leave," she whispered, but he tore it down calmly and tucked it into his Bible. "If I leave, they win," he said softly. "And if I stay, maybe someone else learns they don't have to run." That night, he read again from the book of Daniel, the story of the men in the fiery furnace. And when he came to the part where the flames could not harm them, his voice broke. The room filled with silence. "That's our story, Clara," he said finally. "We've been walking through fire for generations. Maybe it's time we start coming out on the other side." Word of the miracle spread far beyond Troup County. A traveling preacher from Atlanta came to see Samuel himself. He arrived dusty from the road, hat in hand, saying, "Brother, I had to see the man who made the devil choke on his own." "Smoke!" Samuel laughed, shaking his head. "Wasn't me, preacher," he said. "It was the Lord. I just happened to be standing still." The preacher smiled. "That's the hardest thing a man can do." Before leaving, he asked to take one of Samuel's burned porch boards as a reminder. That plank, blackened and split, would later hang behind the pulpit of a church in Atlanta that grew to hundreds strong, its members calling it the Board of Deliverance. And though the clan never returned to Samuel's land, they still lived in the shadows, bitter, humiliated, whispering about with the Bible. But the power of fear had shifted. What had once belonged to them now lived in the hearts of those they'd tried to destroy. Every night, families across the county sat on their porches with Bibles open, reading aloud just like Samuel did. The sound of Scripture replaced the silence that fear had ruled for generations. Even the air seemed different, lighter, freer. The fire had scarred the land, but it had also baptized it. By late summer, Samuel's home had become a gathering place. Every Sunday evening after church, people from nearby farms came with jars of preserves, loaves of cornbread, and their stories. Some came to thank him. Others came because they needed to believe that the world could still be bent toward mercy. The front porch that once faced fire now hosted prayer circles. Under the soft hum of crickets, Samuel would read from his Bible while neighbors nodded, murmuring, "Amen." Clara served coffee, her laughter returning piece by piece. Even the children began to play outside again, their shouts mixing with the rhythm of hymns that rose from the porch. The sheriff's patrols still passed sometimes, pretending it was for safety, though everyone knew better. But they never stopped. The clan still existed, but something had broken in them. Rumor said a few had moved north, unable to stomach the shame. Others quit quietly, burning their robes in secret, afraid the same fire would find them. Samuel never spoke their names. When asked why, he said, "If I keep calling the devil's name, I'll forget how to speak God's." Instead, he taught his sons how to work the land without hate in their hands, and his daughters how to pray with their heads high. By harvest season, when the cotton was ready and the cicadas sang like drums, the air in Troup County carried a different kind of electricity. You could feel it. That hum that happens when people stop being afraid. The Greene farm became the symbol of it all, a place where hate came to kill and left defeated. Travelers came from other towns just to see the porch, to touch the scorched boards where the fire had turned back. Some wept, others stood silent. And when they asked Samuel what he'd done, he always gave the same answer, simple and quiet. "I didn't do nothing but stand. God did the rest." That night, sitting again with his family under a sky clean of smoke, Samuel opened his Bible to Isaiah 43. "When thou walkest through the fire, thou shalt not be burned, neither shall the flame kindle upon thee." He closed it, smiled faintly, and said, "That's not a promise, it's a testimony." And for the first time, Clara didn't argue. She just reached for his hand, the two of them looking out into the darkness, not as victims of the South's cruelty, but as witnesses to its undoing. By autumn, Samuel's name had traveled farther than he ever imagined. Preachers across Georgia spoke of the man who faced the fire with the word, and soon the story made its way into colored newspapers up in Atlanta and Montgomery. Some called it divine intervention, others called it a mystery of the wind, but everyone agreed on one thing. Samuel Greene had stared down death without flinching. White men didn't like hearing that story told, especially in public, but they couldn't silence it. You can't burn a story already made of flame. Still, the attention brought danger. Late one evening, a black car rolled slow past the Greene farm, its headlights off, its tires whispering against the dirt. Clara saw it first. She froze by the window, her hand gripping the curtain. "Samuel," she said softly. He didn't look up from his Bible. "Let it pass." The car paused for a moment at the gate, then moved on. But the message was clear. The miracle had embarrassed powerful men. "You can't hide from what light exposes." Samuel said later that night, "They ain't come for me again because now they know the same fire they brought still lives here." He pointed to his chest. "And here," he added, laying his hand over his son's heart. The next Sunday, Samuel stood before his congregation again. This time he didn't preach about fear or enemies. He spoke of burden. "When the Lord saves you," he said, "He don't do it so you can boast. He does it so you can serve." The church fell quiet. "What happened that night wasn't for me," he continued. "It was for every man and woman too tired to run. The Bible ain't just words. It's a weapon when your spirit knows how to hold it." The room trembled with amens, and for a moment it felt like heaven itself had leaned close to listen. After the service, an old woman who'd walked miles to hear him speak pressed a folded note into his hand. Inside was a single line written in shaky script: "You gave us back our courage." Samuel read it once, smiled faintly, and tucked it between the pages of his Bible beside the burned porch letter that once promised his death. Both, to him, were proof of the same thing. Faith could turn threats into testimonies. That night, as the crickets sang and the sky stretched endless above him, Samuel looked toward the dark road where the car had been and whispered, "You lit your fire once. God lit his forever." Not everyone in Troup County found peace in the legend of Samuel Greene. For the men who had ridden to his house that night, the fire hadn't just burned their robes, it had burned their pride. In backroom bars and barns on the edge of town, they gathered in secret, nursing the humiliation they couldn't drown with whiskey. Harlan Tate, the man who had led them, was a ghost of himself now. His store had gone quiet. Customers whispered about the fire curse that followed him. Some said his barn caught flame one evening without cause, the blaze taking his livestock but sparing his house, almost as if the fire had recognized its master. Others said he saw Samuel in town one morning, standing outside the post office, sunlight glinting off his Bible, and turned white as bone. He stopped sleeping after that. Hatred eats a man from the inside when fear starts feeding it. Tate became obsessed, muttering to himself about witchcraft and black magic. One night, he rode out alone toward the Greene farm, clutching a pistol. The moon was high, pale and full, and the fields shimmered with dew. But when he reached the edge of Samuel's land, the air grew still, unnaturally quiet. His horse snorted and refused to step forward. In the distance, a faint light flickered, the glow of a lamp in Samuel's window. The shadow of the farmer moved calmly behind the curtain, head bowed, reading. Tate raised his pistol, his hand shaking, but as he aimed, the wind rose, hard, sudden, fierce, snatching the hat from his head and dousing his lantern. The field plunged into darkness. In the black silence, all he could hear was Samuel's voice drifting through the air, calm as ever. "No weapon formed against me shall prosper." Tate's hand froze. The pistol slipped from his grip and fell to the dirt. He turned his horse around and rode into the night, trembling so violently he nearly fell. By morning, his mind had broken. When they found him the next day, he was sitting outside his store, staring at the road, whispering that the devil had taken his fire and given it to that preacher. Within months, he left Georgia for good, disappearing into rumor and regret. His name faded, but Samuel's endured. It was as though heaven itself had written justice into the soil. And from that point on, whenever the Klan met in Troup County, there was a rule they never said aloud, but every man understood. You don't go near Greene's land. They told themselves it was superstition, but deep down, they knew it was something else. The kind of power that can't be lynched, burned, or buried. The kind that makes devils remember they were once angels. Years passed, but the night of the fire never left the people of Troup County. The story of Samuel Greene had become more than a tale. It was a pulse, a heartbeat that spread through fields and towns like a secret revival. Families began to gather on their porches at dusk, reading the Bible out loud the way Samuel did, voices echoing across the red clay and pine woods. You could walk through the valley on a summer night and hear scripture drifting through the wind from a dozen homes, each verse a shield against fear. The sound of it made the night itself seem cleaner, as though the darkness had been pushed back one voice at a time. Churches started filling again too. People who had stopped believing that faith could change anything came back, drawn not by promises, but by proof. Preachers spoke of the Greene miracle as a sign that God still walked with the downtrodden, that he had not turned his back on the South. If he stood with Brother Greene, one pastor declared in a packed church, he can stand with you. And the congregation shouted until the rafters shook. The very mention of Samuel's name brought tears to those who had once known only fear. He had done what generations before him had been told was impossible. He had turned terror into testimony. Samuel himself never sought the fame that followed. When reporters from the north came asking for interviews, he sent them away with a polite nod. "Ain't my story to sell," he said, "belongs to the Lord." But he couldn't stop what the story had already started. Young men began to organize meetings under the name the Shield of Light, a group of farmers and laborers who promised to protect their families not with guns, but with unity and faith. They held vigils in the open, torches burning bright, not in hate, but in prayer. For every robe that had once brought fear, a dozen lanterns now burned in defiance. The Klan didn't ride as often anymore. Their power was shrinking, not because men stopped hating, but because the ones they hated had stopped hiding. At home, Samuel kept life simple. He tended his land, raised his sons, and watched the crops grow strong again. But sometimes, late at night, when the wind carried the sound of faraway hymns, he would close his eyes and listen. "They're still singing," Clara would whisper beside him. And he'd nod. That's all I ever wanted. For Samuel Greene, the miracle wasn't that he survived the Klan's fire. The miracle was that he turned fear itself into light, and gave that light to a people who had forgotten they carried it all along. By the time the 1940s rolled in, Samuel Greene's hair had gone white, and the world around him had changed. The Klan still lurked in pockets of Georgia, but their numbers were thinning, their confidence cracked. The old symbols of fear no longer held the same power. In their place rose something new, quiet strength, measured resistance, and the fire of dignity. Men who once whispered now spoke openly. Young people who grew up on Samuel's story began to question the old rules, daring to walk down roads their parents had avoided. Every time someone in Troup County stood their ground, without hate in their heart, folks would say, "That's a Greene man right there." It became a badge of courage, a way of saying you'd learned that faith wasn't just for Sunday, it was for the battlefield of every day. Samuel didn't call himself a leader, but others did. Pastors from nearby towns came to his porch asking for guidance on how to face threats without violence. "It ain't the fire that's evil," Samuel would tell them. "It's what a man does with it. Fire can burn, or fire can light the way." His words spread faster than he ever intended, copied into letters, whispered in pulpits, carried north by black families seeking better lives. They took the story of the man who stood with a Bible and won and made it their own. In Chicago and Detroit, barbershops echoed with his name. In churches from Selma to Savannah, preachers told the tale before communion. His courage had become a parable. Faith was not retreat, it was resistance. One afternoon, a young teacher named Caleb Turner came to visit. He had grown up on Samuel's story and now taught children who didn't believe that faith could change a thing. "Mr. Greene," he said, sitting on that same porch where history had turned, "how did you do it? Weren't you scared?" Samuel smiled, looking out over the golden fields. "I was scared, son," he said. "But faith don't mean you ain't scared. It means you walk through the fear anyway." He placed his weathered hand on the Bible lying beside him. "This is the only thing I held that night. But sometimes what you hold ain't what saves you, it's what holds you." Caleb nodded, eyes glassy with respect. As he left, he turned once more to look back at the porch, where Samuel still sat in the light of the setting sun, a man who had once faced the fire and learned it couldn't touch him. That image would stay with Caleb for life, carried into classrooms and sermons, shaping a new generation. Samuel never sought monuments or medals, but by then, he didn't need them. His legacy was already alive, in every man and woman who refused to bow, in every heart that learned faith wasn't weakness, but fire that burns clean. When Samuel Greene died in the spring of 1951, the whole county paused. The white-owned papers barely printed his name, but the people who mattered, the ones who had carried his story for 20 years, came from miles around. They filled the little churchyard where his coffin rested beneath an old oak tree. Men who had been boys on the night of the fire stood shoulder to shoulder with their sons, holding Bibles close to their chests. Women sang hymns so soft and deep that the air itself seemed to mourn. Even the wind that passed through the pines that day moved slow, as if paying respect to the man who once spoke storms into silence. His coffin was simple pine, his hands folded over the same Bible that had faced the flames. On its cover the edges were still charred, an unhealed scar of that night when he turned darkness into dawn. After the service, Clara laid the Bible on the pulpit of their church for all to see. "This," she said, her voice, steady despite the tears, was his weapon. The congregation fell quiet. He didn't fight them with hate or fear. He fought them with faith. A murmur of amens rose from the crowd, and because of that, we stand here today not in shame, but in strength. Her words carried beyond the walls, echoing into the fields where the fire had once burned. It was as if the land itself was listening, remembering the man who refused to kneel. Years later, during the marches of the 1960s, Samuel's name would return again and again. His sons joined the movement, carrying his Bible wrapped in cloth to protect its burned edges. They read from it during protests, in jail cells, and on courthouse steps. When television cameras asked why they didn't fight back with violence, one of them replied, "My daddy already taught us, fire don't beat fire, light does." The footage would air across the country, and once again, Samuel Greene's faith would blaze into the hearts of a new generation. Today, on the edge of that same red dirt road, a small wooden sign still stands, Green Farm, where the fire turned. Pilgrims come from far places, not to mourn, but to remember. They say if you stand there at dusk, you can still feel a warmth in the air. Not from the sun, but from something deeper. It's the echo of that night in 1932, when a man faced the Klan with nothing but a Bible and walked away unburned. And though the years have buried the hate that brought them, The light. Samuel Greene lit still burns, quiet, steady, eternal, as if God himself never let that flame go out.